Minnesota Vikings at the Buffalo Bills. As we sit currently, this is a 3.5 point spread in favor of the Buffalo Bills at home and 43 and a half on the total. We know the big news here is will he or won't he? We are wondering what is going on with Josh Allen. Boys, I happened to be over in Louisiana this past week. The odds pop very early on the rest of country books, and I have a plus 7.5 in my account for the Minnesota Vikings this week. So I'm going to sit back and smile and enjoy everything. And maybe if this thing somehow plummets to 2.5, come in and play the middle and take the 3 and the 7 and see if I can sit back and double up on this. But at the 3.5, no one cares about what I have, Steven. At the 3.5, as we sit right now, let's just assume that this is Case Keenum this week. Let's assume that it is not Josh Allen. What do we feel about 3.5 in this one?
I have no feeling towards it, and that's because I feel like we're still kind of not done with the line movement here. We're recording Friday morning. I think if Josh Allen officially gets ruled out, this does touch 2.5. And if you want that, I think you better be watching the line like a hawk, because with all of the money that came in early on Minnesota, like you bet with 7.5, 7, all the way down through where we're at now, those early bettors on Minnesota, I think, may come in and try and create a huge middle for themselves here. So I'm not sure that 2.5 is going to last very long. Not necessarily because it's a good number on Buffalo, but just because of the huge middle opportunity for the sharp bettors that came in on Minnesota earlier in the week. So I am interested in Buffalo minus 2.5. I have not locked it in yet. I'm on the fence, and it's because I continue to be skeptical about the Minnesota offense in the context of that hypothetical number, if we get under the key number of 3 here. The Vikings are still 17th in yards per play on offense. Buffalo is 8th in yards per play allowed on defense. The Vikings are 15th in EPA. Buffalo is the number 5 EPA defense. So on paper, this looks like a pretty good matchup for the Bills against the Minnesota offense, who has feasted on 1-score wins in their 6-game winning streak and has put up mediocre numbers, like I just mentioned, against a top 5 easiest strength of schedule of defenses. So on the flip side here, the Buffalo defense did something very interesting last week. They had 6 games this year where they played less than 30% of man coverage, and they played 65% man coverage snaps last week when they held the Jets to 20 points. And Kirk Cousins has the number 3 completion percentage versus zone, but 16th versus man, and the number 20 pass rating versus man. So I think Buffalo continues to come out and play more man coverage like they did last week, even though that's not something they've done for most of the season, because that's what you want to do against Kirk Cousins. So I think there's enough here for the Bills to still pull one out here with Case Keenum, but I wanted to wait to hear what you guys thought of this game before I made any type of bet.
Adam, where do you stand on the Vikings? I mean, listen, it is are they huge wins? Are they blowout wins? They are not. But wins are wins are wins. They're getting banked. We know for sure they're going to win the division. That's already done. That's already said and done. And basically at this point, it's almost just between them and the Eagles when it comes to the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. So, are you of the camp of the Vikings are fraudulent, and at some point the fraud is going to come to the forefront? Or are you hey, this is the same team that lost all these close games last year, and they have figured out a way to win all these close games this year?
What I think about Minnesota is that you have to adjust the entire grading system this year in the NFC. And we use all of the metrics that we use to measure against other teams, against a neutral opponent, again on a neutral field, right? Like you're measuring against a mean as opposed to measuring against what you see this year. Mm-hmm. And this year, Minnesota is good enough to win a lot of these games. Look at Philadelphia. Philadelphia is not as good as being undefeated at this point. If you took this Philadelphia team and put them 3-4 years ago, this is probably more like a 5-3 team, but it doesn't matter because this year they are good enough to be where they are. And this year, Minnesota is good enough to be where it is compared to the field. Now, how do I feel about this game in particular? These are 2 of the 7 fastest playing teams in situation neutral pace this year. I don't think that necessarily changes with Case Keenum at the helm for Buffalo. And I think giving this Minnesota offense more possessions is ultimately a good thing if you want to play an over. And it's all the way down to 43.5. But as we just said, Josh Allen hasn't been officially ruled out yet. 43 is key, 42 maybe even. And so do you want to try to get under that number? Absolutely. So I would be waiting to see where the bottom is, or as close to where you think the bottom is on the total and playing over.
Yeah, listen, I'm certainly higher on the Vikings than most, but it is super concerning though that we do see them, score on a couple of drives and then they will have these giant lulls in these games. And again, like they are figuring out ways to win, but that's, at some point it feels like that's unsustainable. And so this game's interesting for me. I took the 7.5 because I thought there was a better than coin flip chance we wouldn't see Josh Allen this week. If it gets under the 2.5, I'll likely just middle and try and get out of this one because I'm with you, Steven. I think if this thing's under a field goal, I think Buffalo still has the talent here on both offense and defense, even with Case Keenum to probably.
We haven't even talked about the Minnesota defense either, which has been pretty poor statistically against an easy schedule as well. So that's the other side here.